I'm now de- I'm now delighted to be joined by renowned basketball analyst over in the United States, Sekou Smith, who works for NBA.com as a journalist. He also works for NBA TV as a journalist, and he also appears in the prominent member of the Hang Time podcast. Sekou is a renowned basketball analyst. He's appeared on all the top shows covering the NBA across America. And we have Sekou on at the moment to talk about a special feature. We're looking at the top 10 point guards in the NBA currently at present. And this is players that are currently active that have played or held the role of the point guard position in the NBA. So Sekou's going to start. He's going to count down from 10. We're going to have a bit of debate all the way down to number one. But before I bring Sekou in, I'm just going to mention some of the names that are currently active in the NBA that play in the point guard position. So we have the likes of Colin Sexton, the Cavaliers, Justin Winslow of the Grizzlies, Victor Oladipo, the Pacers, Eric Bledsoe, the Milwaukee Bucks, DeJounte Murray, the Mills, Devin Booker, the Suns, De'Aaron Fox, Sacramento Kings, Donovan Mitchell, Utah. We have the likes of Chris Paul, Oklahoma OKC, Russell Westbrook, the Rockets, Steph Curry, Golden State Warriors, Kemba Walker, Boston Celtics, Kyrie Irving, Brooklyn Nets, Rajon Rondo of the Lakers, Pat Beverly of the Clippers, Trae Young, Atlanta Hawks, Luka Doncic of the Dallas Mavericks, Lonzo Ball of the New Orleans Pelicans, Malik Monk of the Hornets, Derrick Rose of the Detroit Pistons, Jamal Murray of the Denver Nuggets, Kyrie Lowry, the Toronto Raptors, John Wall of the Washington Wizards, Eric Payton of the New York Knicks, Damian Lillard of the Portland Trail Blazers, Goran Dragic of the Miami Heat, Markelle Fultz of the Orlando Magic, Ben Simmons of the Philadelphia Sixers, and Kobe White of the Chicago Bulls. And before we get your selection at number 10, this class of 2019 and 2020, for you, Sekou, how does it compare to the class of the 90s where we had the likes of John Stockton, Gary Payton, Steve Nash, young Steve Nash, basically Jason Kidd, real prominent point guards?
Yeah, it's different. It's hard to know which of these guys playing currently are going to be Hall of Famers. Not all of them, but certainly the depth, those bottom five guys. You don't know if they're going to have Hall of Fame careers or not, but it's different. There's always a flagship group of point guards in the league at any given time, and they're playing with usage rates now that are greater than they've ever been. So you got guys who have the ball in their hands and are allowed to create and make plays and score in ways that they haven't been able to at that position historically. So it's a different evaluation, I think, for these guys than it would have been a generation or two ago. And there's some debate on, is a 6'9" offensive initiator really a point guard or not?
Yep.
We mentioned names, some of the names you mentioned, those are the things you have to ask yourself when you're evaluating these guys. Are Luka and LeBron and James Harden traditional point guards? Maybe not, but would they be considered point guards in today's NBA? You can make an argument for or against a lot of those things. So it's an interesting list. I'm cheating. I've got a couple guys tied at some spots on my list, so I could squeeze in more than just 10 names.
Okay.
I'll let the judges decide though if that's fair or not.
And I suppose, Sekou, we'll start at your number 10 selection, and who just breaks into the top 10 for you?
Well, number 10 for me is De'Aaron Fox, and he's kind of outside the periphery for a lot of people, but I think for what he does in Sacramento on both ends of the floor, I think he's underrated a bit. He doesn't get as much noise or hype as a guy like John Morant, but I think he's a better player based on what they're capable of doing right now in the 2019-2020 season.
And De'Aaron Fox, in terms of his skill set, is it just his pace, his transition game to get up the floor, his transition, the speed that he can move at? Is that the real skill set of De'Aaron Fox? He's got so nimble feet and he can sort of glide up the floor.
Yeah, I think he's the fastest guy in the league to me at this stage with the ball underneath him, which is very different than just being fast, getting up and down the floor. I mean, to have that kind of ball control where you're moving with decision-making responsibilities and you got the ball underneath you at all times the way he does. He's a blur, and he's one of the special young players in the league. Going to continue to get better, I'm sure, as he gets stronger and more comfortable running the show out there. I expect him to be a guy who's in that conversation for all-star, bids in the future.
You mentioned there about his stature, and he's sort of small in size, and we all know of his pedigree going forward. But in his defensive game, is there elements that he can sort of prove once he gets bigger to make him a more aggressive defender?
Yeah, I think anytime you get bigger and stronger in the NBA, you allow yourself to become a better position defender. And for a lot of guys, that's what's holding them back right now. Some other guys on this list who are talented on one end of the floor, but not nearly as talented on the defensive end as De'Aaron Fox is. And Fox, as he's 180 pounds soaking wet. So as he gets bigger, stronger, grows up a little bit more, he's going to use that speed, his 6'4" size, and the added muscle, I think, to become an even better defensive player.
And I suppose, Sekou, that's your number 10 selection there. De'Aaron Fox is from Sacramento Kings. And who comes in at number 9 for you?
Number 9 is Kyle Lowry, a champion, multiple-time All-Star. A lot of people love his game. They love the feistiness and and kind of hard-nosed way he plays. Some people think it's a lot of acting and dramatics with Kyle Lowry. I happen to appreciate his game. I think he's turned into one of the better players in the league late in his career. It's very odd to see a guy go 8-9 years deep before he makes his first All-Star team, and now he's making it routinely. So a guy who's an offensive player capable of taking and making big shots at big moments for his team, and he's clearly showed you that he's capable of being a championship point guard, as he did last year with the Toronto Raptors.
And do you think Kyrie Lowry has stepped up his game even more since the departure of his great friend and ally DeMar DeRozan? Because they were such a unit together, and when DeMar left, there was doubts, well, that backcourt relationship is broken up. But do you think it made Kyrie come more out of the shadows and take even more responsibility?
I think it made him adjust his role, playing alongside Kawhi Leonard last year in the emergence. Obviously, if Pascal Siakam has forced him to kind of shift his role in terms of whether or not he's option number 1, 2, 3, whatever it is. But he played a huge role in them winning that championship last year, knowing how to be that second scorer when they needed him to be, knowing how to be the defensive catalyst when Nick Nurse needed it. I think he's shown us all facets of his game. And if you think about a guy's career arc, to go from a guy who's struggling to stay on teams early in his career to being a franchise player now in Toronto, to being now, one of the guys who's going to end up with a jersey hanging from the rafters, potentially up there, a statue, whatever. It's been remarkable to see his career and the trajectory it's been on for quite some time.
And he seems to me, Kyrie Lowry, a great guy who's able to look after his body. He doesn't really get injury. He doesn't really miss much of the season. So in terms of his durability and the ability of his body to stay fresh, you look at someone like John Wall, so talented, but just constantly breaking down with injuries. Kyrie Lowry doesn't seem to have that problem.
Well, he's built like an American footballer. He could pass for an NFL defensive back, at his size. He's stout. And stocky, and like you said, he takes good care of himself. He plays a rough and tumble brand of basketball, but he takes good care of himself and is physical. And he's from a tough part of the country. He's from a tough part of Pennsylvania, where they're kind of known for their toughness on the court and their attitude. So he's definitely representing where he's from.
Sekou Smith, that completes number 9. We have Kyrie Lowry at number 9. Your 10 was De'Aaron Fox. Who comes in at number 8 for you?
Number 8 is Trae Young from the Atlanta Hawks. Probably the best one-way point guard on the list in terms of how good he is offensively, and then what his deficiencies are on the defensive end. But we're talking about a guy who's top 3 in the league in scoring and assists in his second year, a starter on the All-Star team this year, and the young leader of whatever is to become of the team here in Atlanta. But Trae Young is an unbelievable scorer and offensive creator and playmaker. He's just getting started, really, when you look at his career. I mean, he's toe deep into what should be a special career if he can stay healthy and get stronger. He's 6 feet, 165 pounds, 170 pounds, 75 pounds. He's just getting cranked up in terms of what he'll grow into in terms of his body. But already an unbelievable offensive machine, a guy with unlimited scoring range and the ability to create for other people on his team and make them better as well.
I suppose in terms of Trae Young, the Hawks were in terminal decline until they drafted Trae Young. And in terms of having a franchise player now for Atlanta Hawks, how are they going to, in terms of their recruitment, to try and keep Trae Young in Atlanta? Because they have a real jigsaw piece here. They just really need to put more pieces around him going forward if they're going to keep him satisfied.
Yeah, and they've got young players they're trying to use to grow alongside him, but there's certainly some work to be done in terms of roster building. But he's talented. He's super talented, and he's a good enough passer that there are going to be guys who want to play with a guy who can score like he can, but also dish the ball the way he can as well. He's got enough to his game offensively to have complementary guys who are going to really excel and play at a high level. John Collins is one of his young teammates now, who after he got off his 25-game suspension this year showed you that he could play at that next level. They traded for Clint Capella, who they haven't seen because he didn't get a chance to play after the trade deadline and the season got shut down. But I would imagine there are going to be some, complementary players that show up alongside Trae Young in the next few years that end up being really productive based on him being the offensive catalyst for this Hawks team.
So Trae Young comes in at number 8 for you, and who comes in at number 7 for you?
Number 7 is Ben Simmons. And Simmons is kind of the flip side to Trae. I think he's a next level defensive player at his size at 6'10", 240 pounds. He's not the offensive player. There's all the noise made about him not shooting three-pointers and how much they need him to expand his offensive arsenal in order to be more effective and be a better player. But he's been an all-star a couple of times. Everybody understands that they don't come along like him very often, that big, that fast, that adept handling the ball with that kind of ability to just change games, with his pace and ability to get up and down the floor. But there's a lot of work he has to do offensively, I think, that's going to keep him in the second half of this list for the time being until he becomes a more proficient player on that end of the floor.
Ben Simmons with Philadelphia Sixers, and I suppose Sixers are a team in the Eastern Conference. They're just sort of mid-table trajectory. They're trying to make the next step in terms of contending, but it seems the Milwaukee Bucks are a good bit ahead of everyone in the Eastern Conference. But to get up there with the likes of Boston, to get up there with Miami, and they have a young core now with Embiid there as well, with Simmons, and for Philly, it's going to be taking the next step in terms of the evolution, but losing Jimmy Butler, obviously a big blow.
Yeah, and there's some leadership issues that you have to sort out with Ben Simmons. He's young, and I think he had his development stymied a little bit with the changes they've had in personnel. As you mentioned, Jimmy Butler coming and going, JJ Redick no longer a part of the program there, Al Horford.
Yeah.
A veteran leader that joins the group, but certainly there's kind of a tug of war. And you got Joel Embiid to consider, who's also in that locker room. So there's some leadership and growth issues, obviously, that have to be taken care of. But I think the talent's undeniable for Ben Simmons. It's just a matter of time when he puts it all together. And
Ben Simmons, he's probably one of the best players in terms of attacking the basket, attacking the lane. You look at the likes of Trae Young, he's a shooter, deadly, an assassin in terms of a three-point shooter. But Ben Simmons, he attacks the lane with such vibrance and gusto. He's almost possible to stop once he gets into that rhythm.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, he's one of the most difficult physical matchups at the position in the league. And again, if he's just a proficient jump shooter, three-point shooter, he rises up this list to me dramatically and ends up being one of those guys that you look at and say, who are the toughest point guards to scheme for in the NBA? He would be on that short list.
Sekou, so far we have the Aaron Fox, as we said, for Sacramento Kings at number 10, Kyrie Lowry, Toronto Raptors at number 9, Trae Young, the Atlanta Hawks at number 8, Ben Simmons of the Philadelphia Sixers at number 7, and who just misses out on making it into the top 5 for you at number 6?
Well, I mean, we're going based on what they've done this year. I think, Kemba Walker at number 6 from Boston has been more than what anybody could have asked for, for the Celtics in replacing Kyrie Irving. He was a big shot maker and, franchise player in Charlotte. You didn't know how his game would translate to Boston playing alongside young guys like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And he gets there and lo and behold, we realized that he's not only still playing at the all-star level he did in Charlotte, but those other guys have raised their games to another level playing alongside him. I think that goes a long way in pushing him into that top 6. I also think Kemba is an underrated big shot taker and maker, and that's a huge thing with me in the league is the guy who runs your offense is also the guy that you can count on to take and make big shots. That elevates him to another level. That puts him on that next plane as a point guard because you don't have to worry about him facilitate necessarily all the time. Sometimes he's actually facilitating for himself, and that's a huge difference in today's NBA compared to what we might have seen a couple generations ago.
And I suppose Kemba Walker in at number 6. And Kemba, in terms of his career, in terms of the longevity he's been in the NBA, people will look at it and say he probably overstayed his time at Charlotte Hornets. In terms of now, he's he's with a big franchise in Boston. If he had left earlier on in his career, he could have appeared in more playoff conference finals, playoffs, semi-finals. Charlotte were a team that really never made that breakthrough into the playoffs, and if they did make it into the playoffs, they're always a team that nearly exited after got swept in the first round or exited. And for Kemba Walker, a player of his talent, he was so loyal to Charlotte. Was he too loyal?
No, I don't know if he was necessarily too loyal. It's you were wondering, they kept trying to rebuild and put the right kind of team together in Charlotte and just could never get it right. They made some mistakes in terms of the players in-house that they paid big contracts, and then you weren't allowed to really put the right pieces, in that puzzle with Kemba and Charlotte. And when, free agency hits, the guy has a choice. And Boston came a knocking. It's a no-brainer situation for the Celtics to find the right replacement once Kyrie's gone. Kemba's been just a great fit. And I think he would have fit like that in a lot of places. His skill set, to me, is such that he could play almost anywhere. He's a smaller guard, obviously, but he's such a good offensive player and creator. He's a three-point shooter. He can also finish around the rim, get in the lane, and create. He just does so many different things. He's not the defensive liability that you would expect him to be at his size, in the league, because he's got kind of a feisty nature about him that allows him to play bigger than his, 6 foot, frame would suggest.
I suppose the Kemba Walker in at number 6 for Sekou, and so that from 10 down to 6. So we have De'Aaron Fox, Sacramento Kings, Kyrie Lowry of Toronto Raptors, Trae Young of the Atlanta Hawks, Ben Simmons, Philadelphia Sixers, and Kemba Walker at Boston at number 6. Number 5, we're entering the top 5. The competition sort of rises now. A starting spot, as they say in any NBA team, and who makes the 5th spot?
This is out of respect to him, even though he spent a lot of time this season injured. But you got to have Steph Curry in your top 5, even with abbreviated minutes and games played based on injury. He's been out for quite a bit this year. But even in the games when he came back from the hand injury, breaking his hand, you could see just how dangerous Steph is on the floor. And to me, he rises up this list dramatically in general. If we're just talking about not this season and what we watched him do, but the last 5, 6, 7 years of his career, he's obviously, in that elite category of point guards. And when he gets Klay Thompson back next season, I would suspect that the Splash Brothers will be right back to the business of, burning teams from the outside. I mean, they're the 2 greatest shooters on the same team together at the primes of their careers that we've ever seen. Steph's limitless range, on any court makes him a threat. He's changed the way teams defend three-point shooters, and he's dispelled that myth that you can't win championships with a jump shooting, team, basically. They primarily have shifted the way they played and became an outside-in jump shooting team, three-point shooting team, because they had Steph and Klay together.
And I suppose, Sekou, as we go forward in terms of Steph Curry, probably the biggest test for him is to come now in terms of next year, in terms of proving his greatness and his legacy. Because we have the Klay Thompson who undergone a cruciate ligament injury, and Klay is probably coming back, and we just don't know whether Klay is going to be at the same standard of what he was. That's a severe injury for any sportsman. So the pressure is going to be further on Steph Curry to sort of deliver. Kevin Durant has left the scene. Draymond Green, we know of his offensive abilities in terms of rebounding, but if Klay is not at the same level that he was, and it takes him time to get back to that level, the start of the season is so important that Steph is going to have to be the guy who's contributing 30, 40 points a night for Golden State to get the victories.
Yeah, I don't think Klay's struggles are going to be what people think. I mean, they do have the one ageless trait, both of them, that doesn't really get old in this game, and that's being able to shoot it. It's going to be a matter of how does Steve Kerr design an offense to get these guys the maximum amount of shots and good looks at the basket that they're going to need. But they're both think about it. They're in their early 30s or headed into their early 30s. They're both in the primes of their careers physically. So it's now going to be a matter, as you said, of how healthy can they stay to prolong this unbelievable run that the Warriors have had, with this year being a hiccup, obviously, with all the injuries and Kevin Durant leaving, Andre Iguodala, all that stuff. But certainly they're in that magical era for the both of them. And if they can stay healthy enough, I think they will continue to be, in that conversation for the best backcourt in the league. And Steph certainly has to be on any list of the best point guards in the NBA.
And Steph, in terms of playing the game, in terms of shooting, is he, we're going back now the last 2 decades, is he probably the best three-point shot shooter under pressure, in terms of a hand in his face, in terms of a hand in his shot, in terms of trying to get off that three-point shot? Is he probably, out of this class at the moment, is he the best three-point shooter under severe pressure?
I would say the short list includes he and Clay, Ray Allen, and Reggie Miller. And you could make a case for any one of those guys at number one. I happen to think that Ray Allen has a history of making huge shots that put him in an elite category, but Reggie was unbelievable. And I covered the Pacers at the end of his career. And then Steph and Clay have been just nuclear. I mean, when Clay goes nuclear, I don't know if there's ever been a better spot-up pressure jump shot shooter in NBA basketball. I mean, think about some of the wild performances he's had, the 60 points, the 37 points in a quarter. He takes 11 dribbles or whatever. I mean, just ridiculous, the shooting display that Clay puts on. And then Steph, obviously being, I think, the greatest pure shooter the game's seen, at least in my lifetime. So, yeah, that short list of guys, to me, belong in a different category than everybody else.
So we've just entered the top 5. So we have Steph Curry of the Golden State Warriors at number 5, and we're moving up the pecking order now. Competition gets fierce, and who comes in at number 4?
Yes, this is where I start my cheat. Number 4, I've got 2 guys tied at the 4th spot. Chris Paul, the ageless wonder, the crafty point guard that he is, and then the human whirlwind that is Russell Westbrook. I've got those guys tied at 4. It's a coincidence, maybe not, that they were traded for each other this past summer and swapped locker rooms. And now Russ is in Houston playing alongside James Harden, where Chris was last year. Chris is now in Oklahoma City as the leader of a surprise team in the Thunder that's in the playoff mix. But I just think the skill sets of these 2 guys, they'll go down as 2 of the best point guards, not just of their generation, but of all time. Russ may be, and a lot of people debate this, the most athletic point guard they've seen. I don't know if I agree with that, but I think he's certainly in that conversation. And CP3 is one of the greatest technicians. There have been very few guys as proficient as he is at the pick and roll, and then as just a pull-up money shooter. A guy who's been a great shooter in his career, a craftsman, and a guy who's worked his tail off to milk everything he can out of his 6 foot, 170-pound frame. But these 2 guys, to me, go hand in hand. I've got tied at 4, CP3 and Russell Westbrook together.
I suppose we'll start talking about Chris Paul, CP3, first of all. I suppose probably one of the greatest passers of a basketball in the NBA throughout the decades. And if you're a big man, he is the dream to play with in terms of a point guard. But in terms of Houston, when they're running their sort of fast transition games, going up the court, stopping, shooting, Harden putting out big trees, spreading the sort of floor. There was no sort of big element apart from Capella, and they really didn't use that option much for CP3 to explore. Was it a bad? Did he knew what he was getting himself into before he went to Houston? And if he knew what it was, would he have gone and made that move? Was there better sort of destinations for Chris Paul to go to? Because as we've seen so many in the past, James Harden likes to play all 5 positions.
Yeah, well, I think if we base it on how close they got to upsetting the Warriors in the Western Conference Finals a few years ago, if Chris Paul doesn't hurt his hamstring, they very well get in the way of this Warriors dynasty, beat the Warriors in a Game 7, and go on to the finals. And who knows what happens if they face Cleveland in that finals. So I think it was a great move for him to go from the Clippers to Houston. He and James showed us that it could work. 2 ball dominant creators could play alongside of each other. It required Chris to kind of take a step back at times, but when that Houston team was at their best, and I covered them in the entire breadth of that run, when they were together and almost beat the Warriors, they were at their best when Chris Paul saved them. He rescued them against Utah in the conference semifinals, and then he was the guy who put them over the top, potentially in the conference finals against the Warriors, and then got hurt and couldn't finish that series. So he showed everybody in Houston, including Daryl Morey and Mike D'Antoni, that James Harden could play with another guy who needed the ball as much as he did, and they could still win at a high level. I think Chris's contributions to what they did in Houston speak for themselves, and I think what he did in L.A. with Blake Griffin, Doc Rivers, DeAndre Jordan, those guys on the Clippers, turned used to be a laughable franchise, turned them around and legitimized what the Clippers are doing now in Los Angeles.
And in terms of Russell Westbrook, a sort of freak sort of score for a point guard, a guy that averages 48, 49 points a game, MVP of the NBA only a few years back. And in terms of Russ, in terms of his development, in terms of that OKC team that had himself and Durant, that had Ibaka, that had James Harden, that had Kendrick Perkins, for Russ, they all sort of left and he was the last man standing, and he probably sort of feels an awful lot of resentment because there definitely was a title in that OKC sort of franchise before it sort of broke up. And Russ is now leaving a franchise that was home to him, coming into Houston. He has had to adapt his game once more, and it's all about attacking the basket with pace. We've seen the ferocity of those dunks, and Russ is not while OKC he was pulling up, he was shooting threes, he was attacking the basket. Now it's all to the basket for Russ Westbrook at Houston Rockets.
Yeah, I mean, and I think for years we lamented whether or not Russell was a true point guard or whether he should be a shooting guard, and I understand shooting guard, but he doesn't shoot it great by any stretch. So, that makes it kind of tough. He had to be your guy who had the ball in his hands in that Oklahoma City setup. James Harden was coming off the bench then. Yeah. Kevin Durant was your best player. His role was to be the point guard and kind of put that thing together. But if you remember back to those teams, in fourth quarters when they finished games, Russell and Kevin Durant were on the wings, and James Harden was the facilitator. He was the guy that gave him that extra stroke in fourth quarters. So we got some foreshadowing even then about what their roles could be potentially. I'm sure fans in Oklahoma City will go to their grave fuming about what might have been if that group had stayed together with Serge Ibaka and some other key pieces. But Russ's game has always gone against type. He continues to defy any odds. People say he's not a great shooter. How in the world could he score the way he does? By sheer will. He's had knee surgeries that you would think would sap some of his athleticism and energy and bounce. He's come back each and every time just as athletic, just as much of a force of nature as he ever was. It'll be interesting to see how the relationship and the on-court pairing between he and James comes out, in the end. In Houston, will it be enough, the small ball and these two guys playing together, will that be enough to get them to a championship or at least to compete for one or not? But I don't think it will be because Russ didn't put in the grind and work his tail off to get there. So to me, a guy who's vastly misunderstood and overlooked oftentimes when we talk about the best point guards in this league, because he has some things about his game people just don't like.
Sekou, so we have Steph Curry at number 5. We have a tie for number 4 between Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook. Chris Paul with OKC, Russell Westbrook with Houston. A switch of allegiance almost. And number 3 now, we're breaking into the bronze medal position. And who gets this for you?
Damian Lillard from Portland. I think, one of the true hybrid, point guards in this era in terms of being a guy who can run your offense and, be on the ball and strictly be a guy who facilitates and creates for others. And then also a guy who can score with the best of them. I think he's had 4 50-point games this season. He went on a tear at one stretch where he was just dropping 50s like it was, normal. Dame's, to me, greatest trait has not only been his ability to score and compete at that level, but he's a finisher. He's a guy who finishes games. He's had big shots in the playoffs, eliminated Houston one year in a playoff game with a big shot, waved bye-bye to Russell Westbrook and the Thunder and Paul George a couple years ago, ending, that era. in Oklahoma City with a huge shot in the playoff game for Portland. And then if you can take a guy who's 6'1" and not superhuman sized like some players in the NBA are, and build a franchise around him, a franchise that made the Western Conference Finals last year, that tells you a little bit about just how good a player Damian Lillard is. He's one of the best players of his generation and is putting together a Hall of Fame career, all in a market where it's very difficult to attract free agents and build around him the way you can some other players. So I think Dame has shot his way up the last couple of years into the very elite level of point guards in this league by being a pick and roll specialist. It's just an absolute master of the craft and a guy who can score with the best of them.
And in terms of Dame Lillard now, we all know partnerships in the backcourt sort of elevate a player to another level. And he has a real partner tandem in crime there in relation to CJ McCollum. And CJ McCollum, in terms of Lillard's development, has been key. The relationship is sort of rock solid on the court. They're in tandem with each other. They seem to know what each other's thinking at all times. And that's probably helped elevate Dame to another level, having that steady rock CJ McCollum beside him the whole time.
No question. I mean, it helps to have a partner. They remind me kind of a new age Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars, if you will, except both these guys are offensive juggernauts. CJ can get cooking and play unbelievable offensively, but two guys who are just extremely difficult to deal with. And people always ask, like, can you win with these two guys as your backcourt? Two smallish hybrid guards or two combo guards, really. Two guys who could play the point or shooting guard, but neither one of them's tall enough to defend, you would think, their position if they're playing shooting guard. But they've shown you that it doesn't matter. You can throw all that out. These guys are anomalies. They're a different breed. And the fact that they've been so good together, CJ still hasn't gotten his due, I don't think, in terms of all-stars. But it's a tough crowd in the Western Conference. You think about the guards you got to jump over to make an all-star team. It's pretty difficult. But Dame, to me, he's a guy who you can look at and say, if they're face of a franchise in every market, he is the face of basketball in Portland and has been for quite some time and will be until he doesn't want to be anymore.
And Sekou, in terms of the experiment, the big experiment, the big for Blazers, bringing in Hakim Whiteside, if that project goes well, and it is a project people are questioning whether it will go well, does that element give Trailblazers the dimension to get over the line? Because we all know the Western Conference has got stronger even more, and to link up with Hassan Whiteside the last few years hasn't gone to plan for him at Miami Heat. And if himself and Anthony Carmelo just click for a few games, could that be that admission where Blazers, we all know, so good consistently throughout the season, but once they meet a team that they're expected not to beat in the playoffs, they do tend to come up short?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to wait and see until they get healthy next year when they get all those guys on the court together and Carmelo's in the mix. I think he's been great for him. Whiteside is kind of a question mark for a lot of people, but they've got the other pieces. Rodney Hood was huge for him, got hurt. So I'm giving them a break this year, given all the injuries they're dealing with. I want to see what they look like at the start of the next season before I make any lasting judgments about do they have enough. But I think they feel like they do healthy. They can compete with Denver, the Clippers, the Lakers, Houston, Utah, and those other teams that are contended in the Western Conference.
So Sekou Smith, so far the top five: Steph Curry, Golden Warriors, tie between Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook at number 4. Dame Lillard of the Portland Trailblazers comes in at number 3. And for you, who makes number 2 just pipped at the post?
I got another tie. This is my last tie. But I got James Harden and Luka Doncic tied at 2. I think they are part of a jumbo trio, at the very top of my list. They're just two different breeds. I mean, James Harden is probably the most unstoppable offensive player in basketball right now with Kevin Durant on the mend. I'm not sure what you do to combat a guy who can shoot, who's 6'5", 220 pounds, and can get anywhere he wants to on the floor the way Harden can. Just a next level scorer, and a guy physically who doesn't get the credit for being as difficult to deal with on the hoof. A lot of people look and go, well, you double team and get the ball in his hands, whatever. But I mean, it's a big man who's able to go out there and handle the ball and get where he wants to on the floor. Luka is a fascinating study in what I think is the future of basketball, which is nobody's going to care about the size of the guy that you have running your show. He's kind of a compilation of all of the best traits you'd want in a jumbo-sized facilitator. He's kind of got some of that step back, 3-point shooting that James Harden has, and then he's also big enough, strong enough, and physical enough to get to where he wants to from the 3-point line on down towards the basket in ways that LeBron James and some other guys can. So Luka, to me, is the perfect player at the greatest time for the Dallas Mavericks. When Dirk Nowitzki exits the stage, you replace him with what could be the next, international superstar, not named Giannis Antetokounmpo, that will dominate the league. So Luka and Harden, to me, present such huge matchup problems at the point guard position. And I know neither one of them is the traditional point guard in the sense of the word, but they are absolutely point guards in today's game, where we're talking about positionless basketball and facilitating no matter what your dimensions say.
Just mention about Luka Doncic there, probably one of the most skillful player in the NBA in terms of the ball in his hand. And for a one-on-one matchup, he can go left, he can go right. His skill, his technique, his crossovers, his ball handling. In terms of skill level, is he up there with Allen Iverson in terms of pure skill at the point guard position, in terms of attacking the lane, in terms of beating players, crossovers? Has Luka got that same ability that Iverson had?
I think he's got the same aesthetic, in terms of, nobody can force him to play out of his comfort zone. And that's a rare thing to see a player as young as he is come into the league, and he operates at his own frequency. Nobody speeds him up or forces him into, a different tempo that he doesn't want to play. But it helps when you're 6'8" and 230 pounds and you've played as much high-level basketball as he has before he came to the league. Luka showed up with a ready-made skill set to run today's NBA show. His lunchbox was full. He didn't show up needing to learn how to, take his man off the dribble or create space with step backs and ball handling. I mean, he literally showed up with every component you need. It was just a matter of adjusting to the physicality, athleticism, and speed he's going to see in the NBA. His rookie of the year season, he showed you that he had, there were glimpses of what he could do. He came back this year and immediately vaulted himself into MVP conversation, which is stunning for a guy in his second year in the league to take that kind of leap from where he was as a rookie to where he is now.
We know throughout the NBA, the course of the 82-game season, probably James Harden is probably a freak of nature in terms of his scoring, in terms of consistency. But people argue about James when you go into the crunch, when you go into the conference finals, when you go to the semifinals. There's probably a consistency for James Harden that to win the games 3-2 or 3-1 or 4-1, that he can be marked out of a game that in terms of one-on-one matchups. For James coming into the Western Conference now, if he comes up against a Pat Beverly, for example, and has Pat got the capability of shutting down James for one of those crucial games? And we know for Houston that James Harden is such an inspirational figure, and they tend to, if James is shut down, there's panic with the Rockets.
Yeah, I mean, he's got some ghosts he's got to stare down in the playoffs, no question about it. He hasn't had his playoff moment, at least not in the in the conference finals, to the kind of that breakthrough to get his team to compete for a championship. So yeah, he's got work to do there. That is the only real knock that you could throw at him in terms of what he hasn't done. But yeah, he's definitely a guy who has an unfinished resume, and I think he knows that. His general manager certainly seems, Daryl Morey certainly seems to think that James is the breakthrough player you need in Houston to get you to a championship level. We're going to find out in the next couple of years if he's right or not.
And in terms of James's shooting ability, James Harden, 3 points, he can go off for 6, 7 3 points. When he hits that hot streak, in terms of James Harden, when he hits that, gets on a momentum, he can sort of beat teams on his own in terms of clocking up 30, 40 points. Even if some of the Rockets like Eric Gordon, if those are having an off day, if Harden catches fire, he'll drag them over the line anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of, do you want to take your chances with James annihilating you, offensively and daring everybody else to beat you, or do you try and figure out a way to limit what he does and force, him into some kind of frustrating night in terms of how he gets to operate, because he's a very temperamental offensive player. He likes the ball in his hands. He likes to be able to take the shots he wants to take. But you think about it, and when they've been really good, it's when he's played both sides. He's picked and choosed the times to be the offensive assassin that he is, and then other times he can be a decoy and take those double teams, find the right guy, and have Eric Gordon or somebody else. When Chris Paul was there, certainly now with Russ, somebody else can make plays as well. He needs the assistance. I think he needs another star to play with, and it's just a matter of him deciding on a night-to-night basis when he's going to be Batman and when he's going to be Robin.
I suppose, Sekou, before we reveal your number one spot, we'll count down from 10. In 10, we've Darren Fox, Sacramento Kings. In 9, Kyrie Lowry, Toronto Raptors. In 8, Trae Young, Atlanta Hawks. In 7, Ben Simmons, Philadelphia Sixers. In number 6, Kemba Walker, Boston Celtics. In number 5, Steph Curry, Golden State Warriors. In number 4, we have a tie, Chris Paul of the OKC, Oklahoma City Thunder, and Russell Westbrook of the Houston Rockets. In number 3, we have Damian Lillard of the Portland Trailblazers. In 2, we have another tie, James Harden of the Houston Rockets, and Luka Doncic of the Dallas Mavericks. And I suppose the big reveal now at number 1, and who takes this for you?
Yeah, I know everybody's wondering where's Kyrie Irving, but number 1 is not Kyrie. He's kind of on the outside end of my list. A lost season for him. Number 1 is LeBron James, obviously, and I think there was a question 2 years ago. We were talking, some guys and myself were covering the NBA Finals, and we were trying to forecast what would LeBron's role look like in the twilight of his career. A ball-dominant, 6'9", 260-pound, alien. I mean, it's just the next level physical specimen. But what could he do late in the career when he doesn't have the same athleticism he had in his heyday, and he doesn't have the physical advantages that he used to have when he could jump over everybody and we could play above the rim? Well, little did we know he'd still have those advantages 17 years in. LeBron is still the physical mutant, that he's always been. Maybe doesn't jump as high, but certainly has reserved some of that energy. But the thing I always felt like that LeBron's best position, since I think he's more Magic Johnson than he's ever been Michael Jordan, I felt like LeBron would be a great facilitator late in his career, because he's going to be big enough, strong enough, smart enough, a brilliant basketball player to dissect defenses and learn how to attack them. But with his physical skill, just his physical brute force to be that big, strong, and crafty, it would make him a nightmare matchup. And he's shown you this year, being in the mix for MVP right there, to me, number 2 to Giannis all season. And the fact that he's taken that Lakers team with Anthony Davis alongside him and elevated them to the best team in the Western Conference, leading the league in assists at this stage of his career, which is unheard of. And he's not even traditionally a point guard. It just speaks to the greatness of LeBron and what an unbelievable job he's done at every stage of his career, adapting to whatever role was needed of him on the team he's on.
And you mentioned the role needed of him. And when you look at the Lakers, LeBron probably had to step back into that sort of point guard position. When you look at big men, Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee, DeMarcus Cousins, people will say, is there the legs in that Lakers team apart from LeBron? Does LeBron have to do much of the running? Can Howard get up the floor? Can McGee get up the floor? Can DeMarcus Cousins? Very big team, but against a transition team like a Blazers, like a Houston Rockets, that's going to be the real test, those 3-point fast shooting teams for the Lakers and how they deal with that. And that'll probably test LeBron even more than what he had in Miami Heat when he had Dwayne Wade beside him, when he had Chris Bosh beside him. He had that Arsenal beside him, 2 players that were great speedsters as well, that could get up and down the court. He probably doesn't have that at the Lakers this time around.
Yeah, he's playing with it. I mean, he's got AD, obviously, who's one of the very best players in the world, obviously. But he doesn't have another wing creator like he had in Dwayne Wade. That was when we saw LeBron at his very best, when he had another all-time great perimeter player like D Wade, and then a Hall of Fame stretch forward in Chris Bosh to really help him take his game to another level. I think LeBron's most impressive trait, for all the things that have been extraordinary and next level about his career, is LeBron's ability to take care of himself as well as he has, to physically stave off father time the way he has, and to continue to be night after night the most lopsided physical specimen. I mean, literally, he takes the floor. There are very few nights when there's anybody on the court physically who can come close to matching him. Kawhi Leonard has been one of the few guys, just from a physical nature, that's every bit as big, strong, powerful, and skilled as LeBron. But the shooting also, he's become such a better shooter at this stage of his career than he was early on. He's done the same things, and I don't like getting into the comparisons between he and Michael Jordan. Everybody likes to do this debate about who's the GOAT. Yeah. That's a different conversation that I think Michael Jordan shut the door on a long time ago. But the one comparison about those two guys that I really think is spot on is Michael Jordan's first three-peat, he played above the rim. He was Air Jordan. His second three-peat, I always joke that he was floor Jordan. He was every bit as good, skilled, dangerous, hard to deal with, except he didn't do it playing above the rim. It was when he developed his fadeaway jump shot and his ability to post up smaller guys and work, with his back to basket game. To me, LeBron, interestingly enough, he's never embraced a post game. That's not something that he's ever seemed to want to do, but he's every bit the point guard that he's always wanted to be. He's every bit the Magic Johnson, kind of directing traffic, seeing over defenses, using his photographic memory to attack you and take advantage of, deficiencies that you might have. This is the part of his career where he gets to show off that big, beautiful basketball brain that he always brags about. He puts it on display on a nightly basis, and that's why the Lakers are the best team in the Western Conference.
I suppose, Sekou, you mentioned Kyrie Irving, and I suppose for many people looking on in terms, he probably is the big name that's probably not on the list, Kyrie being dogged by injuries. But I just want to bring up one or two sort of names here that probably have been prominent point guards. First one that comes to mind, he's probably a young shooting sort of talented sensation, but probably Devin Booker, a guy with so much potential for the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah, and D. Booker is one of my favorite players from my hometown. He's not really a point guard to me in today's NBA. He's such a skilled shooter. I would categorize him more as a two guard. He hasn't played with a great point guard for a long time in Phoenix. Now he's got somebody in Ricky Rubio who can really be the facilitator that he needs to play alongside him. And that's been great for him. But yeah, I didn't consider him in this category. Like he can score like Harden and Luka and these guys, but I don't think he's getting the usage that those guys does. He doesn't have the ball in his hands as much as those guys do to make him a player I would put in this category.
And I suppose another name, just putting it to you there, an awful lot of helper, scalper, Skype, wanting this guy on their franchise, D'Angelo Russell, sort of came to prominence with Brooklyn Nets. A guy like Kyrie Lowry, his career wasn't really going anywhere, and in terms of having the Lakers, it didn't work out for him. Brooklyn, it sort of transformed him again into a sort of new level, and for D'Angelo now, this is the big question mark now. Are we going to see the consistency at a new level?
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota wanted him so bad. They wanted to pair he and Karl Anthony Towns together, and they finally got a chance to do it. So we'll see going forward. He's super talented. He's a jumbo-sized point guard who can score it and, can play on or off the ball. But I just don't know if he's got the makeup yet to be in this elite category. He certainly has an all-star, appearance under his belt. Had a huge year in Brooklyn, before moving on to Golden State. But I'm still a little skeptical of whether or not he belongs in that elite level of lead guards, facilitators, or if he's just a guy who's going to be a really good scorer and a complimentary guy, but not necessarily a frontline superstar.
And a team that's made so much waves in the Western Conference in the last few years, a team that has the draft has sort of transformed them in terms of making the playoffs. Jamal Murray going to the Denver Nuggets. Jamal is now probably the franchise player for the Nuggets, and when he is on form, Jamal is practically unstoppable. And he's probably the next breed, if you're probably looking at the next decade going forward for potential players in the point guard position to create legacy. Jamal Murray is probably one of those names.
Yeah, I think Jamal Murray's there. I think DeJounte Murray potentially is in that category. Ja Morant, obviously, as I mentioned earlier. But yeah, Murray is weird because as much as a point guard as he is, they run so much of what they do through Nikola Jokic, who's really their best player, best passer, best facilitator. So it's strange for a guy to be in Murray's position where he's technically the point guard, but all of those best qualities you want in a guy who's initiating offense for you reside in that big old buzz cut 7-footer they got in Nikola Jokic, who's one of the best players, arguably the best big man in basketball right now. And Mike Malone runs his offense in, through, and around Nikola Jokic and what he can do. Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic are brilliant in the pick and roll when they're at their best. So they got a chance to not only elevate themselves, but each other going forward in their careers if they're going to put Denver on the map and make them a contender.
And I suppose lastly, Sekou, before I let you go, the final two names I'm going to throw at you now. These guys being dogged, being plagued by injury. Derrick Rose now with the Detroit Pistons. If you're making this list back in 2004, 2005, I suppose, presume Derrick Rose an absolute shoe-in on this list. And probably a guy who broke into the NBA with so much potential. One of the key, went in a top pick in terms of the draft. Being drafted by Kentucky, a superstar college career, went to the Wizards. John Wall is so phenomenal in his first few years, being dogged by injury. And are we going to see a comeback in terms of John Wall? And in terms of Derrick Rose, he's probably at the latter end of his career now, just seeing out these final few years. But is there a fight back, a recovery left in John Wall? And does he really need to get away from the Wizards?
I don't know if he needs to get away from the Wizards or not, but I hope there's a comeback in him in regards to what we've seen from Derrick Rose, who I thought Derrick Rose had an all-star season this year. I thought he could have easily been on the all-star team with the way he played. He certainly was deserving. To come back from the types of injuries that he's had, that sort of adversity in a career, is remarkable. I mean, there was a time, you're right, if we'd have done this list, before he got injured, he would have been one or two on anybody's list of the best point guards in the league. He was that dynamic. Guys like Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, all those guys, he was taking advantage of them. They could not physically compete with him. His first step was too good. His bounce was better than anybody's. He was the uber athletic point guard before Russell Westbrook stepped into those shoes when he got hurt. So, yeah, if John Wall, who at one time was the De'Aaron Fox of the league, the fastest dude in the league with the ball under him, if he finds a way to get back to his form, that'll be interesting. It's just tough, though. I think the point guard ranks have gotten so thick over the past few years, and there's such a variety of guys that you could choose from, and then the offenses have changed dramatically. We now play where your point guard facilitator has so much decision-making power and spends so much time with the ball in his hands that it allows guys who maybe wouldn't have been able to be proficient at that position in a bygone era are now central figures for their teams.
Sekou Smith, an absolute pleasure talking to you this evening to reveal your top 10 point guards in the NBA at present. And the number one spot for you went to LeBron James of the Los Angeles Lakers. We hope to God we'll see basketball back in our TV screens here in Ireland so much. Basketball Ireland does terrific work throughout the country, and we wish you all the health and safety over in the USA and a prominent basketball career there with NBA TV and NBA.com. Sekou Smith, take care.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it.